I'm getting a lot of questions from people on Twitch asking me things because I am developing a terminal, and then of course, yeah, people ask me like, what do you think about Alacritty? What do you think about Rust? Surprisingly, because I program in C++, but also things like, what do you think about Fish Shell, PowerShell, ZSH? What do you think about Warp Terminal or Fig? You know, first, who am I? So I develop a terminal emulator myself, which is Contour. We have some kind of a user base, and we have some, especially also some unique features, and a little bit about 80,000 lines of source code. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a one-day project. It is actually, in fact, the project I chose to have as my lifetime project. So yeah, I have been developing this for almost, or is it already 3 years? Yeah, 3 years. And yeah, we're getting regular contributions to it, and I'm really thankful to the community. So with this said, let's dive into the mind of a terminal developer and yeah, try to answer the questions I'm usually receiving on Twitch. What kind of terminals do we actually want to talk about? I mean, there's definitely Alacritty, there is Warp, there is Kitty, there's Windows Terminal, and WezTerm, and I would like to talk about these 5. I'm not sure I'm getting to all of these. Let's see. If not here, then in another video, in a second one. And especially WezTerm is something I need to dedicate its own video in the future. Yeah, what do I think about Alacritty, for example, right? Because that's what people ask me. So, I mean, who needs paints and tabs anyway, right? Because in Alacritty you don't have them. And I still remember the main author said, like, just use tmux, you know, you don't need this. And back in time, they didn't even have scrollback, just use tmux, you know, because all we care about is performance. And yeah, we have to respect that design goal. And therefore, the main author, at least, is pretty reluctant in implementing certain features that might potentially drain the performance. And yeah, you either like it or you don't. So, if you like the terminal, just use it. In the end, I think most users using a terminal fall into, I would say, 2 categories. Either you don't give a shit, you know, you just use whatever's there by default. For example, GNOME terminal, which is perfectly valid choice, you know. I mean, it just works. It's versatile. It works for most of the people. Or KDE console, which is actually what I used to use for decades. In general, Alacritty is a very good terminal. It is relatively fast. It is a slim terminal. It's not feature packed with stuff that most likely you don't want to use anyway, and you know, you just put it away. And so yeah, it's good. So now let's switch on my developer brain here as a terminal developer. There's one thing that when I checked their performance, and especially VTE Bench, I realized that most of the performance test cases they're having are tailored to one need, and that is running tmux inside of Alacritty. I mean, if you look at it, what kind of tests would you want to run in there that are tailored to tmux, you know? I mean, how does tmux look like? Usually you have some nice bar at the bottom and then text floating up, in at least in a primary screen, which is floating up a lot, depending on what kind of output you're having. So you want to optimize for this case, and they did optimize for this case. That is what you see in the benchmarks. What do I like about Alacritty? Certainly its configuration is well structured. So what else do I like? It's speed, of course, you know. I think nobody actually cared about, or at least almost nobody cared about speed until Alacritty came along. Because, I mean, for myself, for example, I used console for a decade, and yeah, I was sometimes experiencing performance degradation, but not because of the slow terminal. And yeah, console isn't the fastest one, like not at all. Would I have noticed? Rarely. Like, I mean, if you cut a gigabyte file to std out, you will certainly notice a difference between almost all of the terminals. Like, they all have like really different numbers, because almost none of the terminals actually optimize for performance. That's not their use case, except Alacritty. At least That's the one people know the most about, right? Yeah, what do I dislike about it? Well, that's a tough one. Because architecturally, I would say Alacritty is pretty nice. Software, so here the developer Chris is talking again. Architecturally, it's a really nice terminal emulator. They seem to care about conformance, VT conformance, which is also nice, but sometimes you know, like we are living in 2022. We shouldn't actually think too much about features from 1970s and, you know, always stick to what we had like 50 years ago. Maybe it's nice to look forward, and that's actually one of the really great things that ConPTY, like the ConPTY Terminal emulator, did. So what do I dislike about Alacritty? Its user base. I'm so sorry, man. It's I mean, I remember there's so much software going on, and I don't try to address here anyone personally, but having projects labeled as Project XYZ written in Rust, it's directly trying, you know, it's inducing me to vomit. So yeah, I mean, have it written in Rust. At one point, I made a meme out of it and wrote like my software XYZ written in C++, just to, you know, as a meme. It's the user shouldn't give a shit. However, most users seem to do so. Like at least for the Rust fanboys, they most likely all use Alacritty, not for the features of Alacritty, because there are not many. They use it because it's written in Rust, and then you see like, okay, of course, many people say like, oh yeah, it's faster. Would you have noticed? Like, would you really have noticed? If you do a cut benchmark, I can trivially do that, and let's see if we do. So, I mean, there are quite a few interesting discussions in the GitHub where you can submit bugs or feature requests. And quite some time ago, every time when I checked, I noticed most of the bug reports they're getting are platform specific because of something is either not implemented or badly implemented. And you don't have these problems in C++ because everything is well established already. So you have a established ecosystem. And if you want to create a project like with a long-term goal in your mind, like for example, oh, I'm looking for my next long-term project, something that you can work on and still have fun working on in like say 10 to 20 years until you die or whatnot, you know. So as long as I'm able to use the computer, I would like to contribute to this project because I believe in it. And if this is me, and in fact it was me, just not for Alacritty, I would not have picked Rust because Rust is way too new for that. I'm not saying Rust is bad. Rust as a language is nice. But the ecosystem around is probably a little bit too young for long-term projects, which you see like just today I was reading about one ticket in the Alacritty issues tracker, and it's basically set on hold because they're waiting on WInit, one Rust library, to finish implementing something there before they can actually continue working on this. And that's nothing I want to see myself in, you know, because it's actually in the end it's all of our own personal time. If I happen to have time, I don't want to, you know, be buzzed with problems from the ecosystem. So I want to use something that is there and will stay there in this kind of sense. So I used to make this mistake some years ago, and I chose Ruby on Rails. And I even changed companies just to get into the pros of, you know, some Ruby on Rails developers. And if I have ever some questions, then I can ask them. And major mistake. I never ever gonna pick some technology like this again. In the end, I had a lot of backwards incompatible breakages, and I almost ended up rewriting my own code base just because I was choosing something that is like highly fluctuating. So in my terminal emulator, for example, I chose Qt or Qt, and I specifically chose this for long-term maintainability. And this is if not the main factor for me to choose a GUI toolkit, for example. You know, I don't want to rewrite the front-end code again and again and again. And I did already once because initially in my project, I chose GFW3 until some certain point, but I would like to talk about other stuff later. So much about Alacritty. The next one is ConPTY. So ConPTY is the developer Chris talking again. ConPTY is actually hybrid implemented. Its core is in C, whereas the actual business logic mostly is written in Python. And that sounds like a good thing because generally speaking, C is a language you should not want to implement business logic in, unless it's probably a kernel or whatnot, you know. But even there, like the new kernel from Google is written in C++. So yeah, it doesn't have to be C just because it's hardware nearby. But Python is generally a good choice. And people keep saying Kitty is fast, but Kitty is using Python. Is it really fast? We can find out. So, okay. What I really like about Python generally is that it is actually pretty feature-packed, and it tries to push forward with respect to modern terminal emulation needs. So the one thing I was actually giving as a negative point for Alacritty is a positive point here. He, like the author and maintainer of Kitty, tries to push forward with things regardless of how it looked like in the past. And I'm explicitly addressing here Unicode, because Unicode was not there when terminets arrived, right? So Unicode came later, and then terminets, you know, they had to adapt to it. And there's no formal specification, not yet. It might come, I just heard last week or so. So yeah, what do I like? It's relatively speedy. Not as speedy as Alacritty, but still more speedier than all the other rest that you at least know of. It is not perfect, but it does have pretty good emoji support, by far better than what, for example, Alacritty has. Or if I try to run my personal emoji test script right now, it's not nice on Alacritty. But on Kitty, most of it works, and that's actually kudos, great. Even the country flag works, at least, even if you put two consecutively together. And that's actually a hard topic. And I would like to know how he did it. And I'm 100% certain I was implementing it differently than he did, because Kitty does not have grapheme cluster segmentation support. Whereas Contour and WezTerm, they seem to have proper Unicode grapheme cluster segmentation. What a buzzword. So, I mean, for Contour, I know we have it. For WezTerm, I was actually concluding that it does have it because the way it performs with Unicode in the tests I was doing. So yeah, that's all great. I mean, for Kitty, what I also do like is actually the kittens. Even though it's kind of bad that if you use your Kitty terminal emulator on your desktop and then you SSH into machine, you don't have the kittens anymore, because it's actually in the binary, right? And you can't just easily push it up because it's a GUI application. So how do you use the kittens on the server side? There's at least one guy who was acknowledging this kind of design flaw, and I think sooner or later, eventually, this one will be fixed. So yeah, what do I dislike about Kitty? Sadly, the author is not actually the best, the greatest on earth communicator. Neither when it comes to the community, nor when it comes to interdisciplinary terminal emulation developer communication. It's more like a mess. But it's just my personal opinion. The other thing I dislike about Kitty is the fact that it doesn't exist on Windows, because the author actually doesn't give a shit, and that's okay. You know, we have to actually live with this fact, and that's okay. It's his choice. Then just use something else. We also have another negative point on the tech side here, and it will eventually come to a problem for Kitty, and maybe also sentence Kitty to death in the future. Like, I mean, not in 5 years, but depending on how long Kitty will survive, you know. It's actually using GFW3, the one thing that I was migrating away for a very good reason. And I realized they're actually maintaining their own fork inside of the Kitty source code of GFW, probably for the same reason that I had, which made me drive away from GFW. They just, you know, they just inlined it in Kitty. I mean, business-wise, it's a good solution because you just change whatever you need. But will you be able to keep up with all these platform-specific changes? What else do we have? We have Warp Terminal. Warp Terminal, sadly, I have to say, is only available on macOS. Luckily, I'm having a MacBook here. So what do I like about Warp? What I like about Warp, generally speaking, what makes the core feature of Warp, well, at least one of these things. And this is that they try to move the core ecosystem forward. For example, they have this blocks feature, which is actually super amazing in the primary screen, that you can easily fold and unfold or copy the output plus the command or without the command. And it actually makes it visually appealing. The idea itself is actually awesome. I really like the idea. And nobody else so far has been doing it. Almost. The idea behind did exist before already, even though it was not visually there yet. But if you think about integrations like shell integration in the terminal, there's at least WezTerm. I think he was the first one to introduce some VT extensions to mark the beginning of a command prompt and the end of command prompt. And therefore, you know, whatever's in the middle in the primary screen is apparently the output. And that made vertical jumping possible, for example, like across these commands you're having. And you could actually give them a little bit more semantic meaning. I don't know that much about WezTerm, and sadly, the author passed away, so there's no work on it anymore. But iTerm actually integrated some of the VT extensions that WezTerm had into iTerm. What do I dislike about Warp? I dislike the way they implemented the shell integration. On the one side, they say it's a feature, and yes, it is a feature from their point of view. They are literally re-implementing the shell, at least the command line input. One of the good things also about Warp is that they implemented a more intelligent shell prompt, sadly by fully re-implementing it. The big dislike here is the fact that they did it, and nothing against the idea. The idea is great, but the way they chose how to implement it is the worst they could have chosen. I do understand why they did it, because in the end, it's a company behind. They want to monetize. So if you want to use something like this, you must use Warp. It's not nice. But generally speaking, it is a good terminal emulator. It is some really good visions about it. So for me personally, I would say the positive things weighed out the negative things if there wouldn't be performance. I don't know if they fixed the performance issue, which I was actually once even showcasing, like live demoing on Twitch stream, where I was showing just, you know, a simple cut on a 500 megabyte file, and it stuck, you know, it froze. They might have fixed it now. I hope they did, but it wasn't really the greatest experience if you know, like if you're a terminal emulator developer yourself and you want to do some bench tests to see like, okay, they say they're blazingly fast, but how blazingly fast are they really? Oh, it's stuck. Oh, this hurts. Yeah, shit happens. So what I really dislike is the fact that apparently they're reusing some open source code, such as from Alacritty, the internal terminal emulator stuff, probably the grid system and VT emulation stuff. I don't know how much they're reusing because they're not opening up the source code. What's the license of Alacritty? Can they even do that? Like, I mean, are they allowed to do this? Yeah, it's kind of sad. Like, I would really love them to open source at least parts of it. This would probably, you know, this would probably make a few people more happy. The next thing actually directly comes as a competitor to Warp Terminal without being a terminal. I was just mentioning the more intelligent command line prompt, right? With some nice multi-line editing, but also especially the intelligent autocompletion. So, I mean, there's this one project called Fig, which you can find at fig.io, which is basically implementing exactly that and almost exclusively only that. So what they give you is a autocomplete. Nothing more. It's not a terminal. It's a integration to the terminal. And this actually comes to a great advantage to Warp, because if you want to have this feature from Warp, you have to use Warp. You must use Warp. Whereas if you want to use Fig, you just, you know, you grab any of the supporting terminals and you can use Fig independently of the terminal emulator of your liking, you know, because you don't really want to be forced to switch to Warp, which might not even exist on your platform. This is really great, and this is exactly why I think it's actually better than Warp. I do like it. So I do like that they do exist. They also, that's also one of the really great things, just like the Warp team, they really try to move the terminal ecosystem forward, and I really like this idea. We should probably talk a little bit more to each other, you know, so that not everybody is doing its own stuff. Would be, you know, kind of sad. So what do I dislike? Probably only tech reasons here. So from the user's perspective, I think everything is okay. Yeah, I mean, you need to look in just like Warp, you know, which would be a dislike there too. Would be questionable when for Warp this one will go away, if at all. And so for Fig, you also need a login because you can synchronize across computers, which is actually a nice feature. It would be nice to have this one also independently so that you are not sending your data to some server which you don't know. You know, you have to trust it. What else do I dislike? I mean, what I really dislike about Fig is the fact that they don't document the way how to integrate it into a not yet integrated terminal emulator. So when I was trying to get Fig running in my own terminal emulator, I had to basically debug it and, try to reverse engineer, not entirely, but, as much as was needed in order to understand what the heck is going on in Fig and how is all this drop-down placement working. But it was nice, kind of found a bug on my side, so yeah, thanks for that. And while the pop-up is actually really well constructed and visually appealing, to me at least, I think it should have been a VT extension. Like, it should be part of the virtual terminal protocol. Like, if you wanna request a pop-up with some auto-completion types in there, it should be probably visualized by the terminal emulator if you want something graphical. Just send the request to get some auto-completion with, subset XYZ or so. But for all those people who think like, what the heck is he talking about? Like, VT sequence, what is this shit? I want to explain in a dedicated video, basically, because that's probably a little bit too complex. I just want to get an insight into my mind here. So from a point of view of a terminal developer. So what do I think about Windows terminal? What I really like is they do exist. I was super happy about the fact when they have been announcing it, because ConHost, which is what you used to know before that on Windows, it works, but it was always second-class citizen. And with Windows terminal, it becomes much more permanent. And I think I know why they did it, because they're probably not just losing users to macOS, but also developers, because it's much more sexy to develop on macOS, which is closer to Linux/Unix than Windows, because the server side is always, it's rarely Windows. It's mostly Linux. And it's easier to run and test stuff on a system which is much more alike Linux than on Windows. And that's also one of the reasons why they created Windows subsystem for Linux, which is also a great project. What I really like about a Windows terminal is also that they try to move the system forward, not with having 100% backwards compatibility in mind. And here again, I'm referring to Unicode. They can do stuff which quite a few other terminals on Linux can't do yet. I think it's only the more recent terminals which try to push the limit forward here. What do I like about it apart from this? They have sound. Have you thought about this? You can actually play sound in the terminal. This is an example of how to play the Pac-Man theme. So let's try it out. Okay, let's try it out. Let's open up a terminal here and let's listen to some sound. Some terminal sound. Not sure you know this, but most likely you all know that. Okay. I mean, there's one other really great thing. Where is it? Star Wars. Let's listen to the Star Wars theme. And now imagine you have some terminal application which tries to pump up a little bit of spice and also uses a little bit of MIDI sound. At least it's actually as simple as that. You can't play full MP3 sound here, but it's a start, And it is a standard which used to be there like I think 50 years ago or so already, and that's actually a fun VT escape sequence revival. It's nothing more than that, It's a revival. And I mean, yes, we are currently talking about a Windows terminal here because a Windows terminal does in fact have it, but I'm not on Windows here, I'm on Linux. And there's one terminal who also supports that. And yeah, you might guess which one. Okay, what do I dislike about a Windows terminal? It's only available for Windows. I mean, who would expect something else, right? It's a totally perfect reason. It's just sad because it is generally a good terminal if we ignore the performance problems, which are not directly connected to the Windows terminal, but more likely to ConHost, which is sitting underneath. So this is really sad. So from the tech Chris talking here again, we all know, at least probably most of us know, that Windows was inventing ConPTY, which is basically giving a compatibility layer of PTY to ConHost. So you can use PTY VT sequences on Windows. And sadly, they actually have been implementing their PTY interface on top of ConHost. And they should have been doing it the other way around, because that's one of the main reasons why all the terminals actually are so slow on Windows. Probably some of them even more slow than others. I mean, there's also WezTerm. You know, WezTerm is a terminal which I don't know how many people are using, but it is also written in Rust. Yeah, that's also one of those terminals who like to say like, WezTerm is a GPU-accelerated cross-platform terminal emulator and multiplexer written by Wez, implemented in Rust. Well, I might have guessed that it was implemented by Wez because it's called WezTerm. You know, like there's the meme of written in Rust again. Like, why do we all need to say like XYZ is written in Rust? Yeah, because this is what is triggering most of the user bases. Like most people who really love Rust most likely also only prefer tools which are written in Rust. My terminal emulator is also written in Rust, just so that you are using it. No, it's not. So, I mean, the really great thing about WezTerm is that it's really feature-packed. Probably a little bit too much, because it's so feature-packed that it's slow again. Yeah, it's slow again. It's even slower than Windows Terminal on Windows. Which comes to the other positive side again. What is so great about WezTerm? It's at least platform independent again. What is also great is that WezTerm actually, I think it's, so Kitty Terminal used to be the best one when it comes to rendering emoji. Like all the rest, you know, have been in the shadows. But then came WezTerm, and WezTerm kind of nailed it. And I think WezTerm is, apart from ConPTY Terminal Emulator, the other only one. So we are the only two which are doing proper graphene cluster segmentation. I can't say for sure, but all the tests indicate that he's doing that correctly. So that's a great thing. Kudos to that, because I know it's not that easy. I was doing it myself. One of the other things that I would say is a feature of WezTerm is that you have tabs and panes and even a daemon mode. And it is having a really feature-packed configuration, which is Lua based. And I would even say like, man, that's even a negative side. So yeah, I mean, this is it about terminal emulators plus Fig as a tool of what I think about it. And I mean, there's of course plenty of other things, but I would like to give it a cut to stay more focused in what I'm saying. So in the future, I would also like to talk about some specific features, such as, you know, images in the terminal, proper Unicode support on the terminal, which is personally for me really important, because the young generation of power users, and yes, I think this term does exist, they probably expect the terminal to work more or less similarly to how the web browser works, and this includes Unicode, including emoji and ligatures, you know, programming ligatures and images, because it's actually nice to have them in the terminal, even though now you could say like, oh, just use an image viewer. Yeah, you can. But if you have it, it still would be nice, you know. So many thanks for watching, and I hope you liked it. If you have any questions, actually, please ask me. And then I can answer them from the point of view of a terminal developer. Thanks.